Hey everybody, it's Tim Hinton, the Beast of the Marching Arts. Thank you so much for watching. We are talking about visual instruction and specifically being a visual caption head. And we have some real ringers on the line tonight. This is going to be a very valuable conversation. Wes Pendergrass is with us. Wes, how are you?
Good. How are you guys?
I am good. Thank you for being here. Victor Pizzola is with us. Victor, how are you?
Doing great.
Thank you for being here. And Ryan H. Turner is with us. Ryan, how are you?
I am all thumbs up, sir.
I'm so glad to have you guys here. And we may have one other person join us tonight to talk about how to be an effective visual caption head. And this is going to be a really important conversation because it seems like the visual component of the show gets more and more important every year. And somebody has to wrangle the staff, make sure they're all on the same page, and especially figure out what is important to work on, how to prioritize, how to make the staff all effective, use the same language, all that stuff. We're going to be talking about it tonight. We're going to go back around. I'm going to ask everybody just sort of briefly, I think everybody knows who these guys are, but just introduce yourself, say where you are, how stressed out you are about writing drill right now or being ready to teach drill. Wes, go back to you. Remind us where you are.
Yeah, I'm in Bentonville, Arkansas. I'm an Arkansas native, but I have kind of been all across the country. I write for Bentonville here in town and a couple other Grand National finalists, as well as marching bands from across the country. And I'm kind of big into the beginnings of the indoor winds thing, excited to see how that turns out. And unfortunately, I am very, very much in the thick of the drill writing time as well. I'm really excited to talk kind of like what we were talked about the last time I was on this podcast. I like to talk about the ways that I've messed up in order to help other people not make those same mistakes. It's not necessarily that I'm good or bad or anything. It's just that I have spent a lot of time and effort learning the hard way. And sometimes it's fun to share that with others.
You know, and I love that you said that because I have the great privilege of getting to talk to some like really important, accomplished, smart people, you know, people like Scott Chandler and Keith Potter. And I'm going to get to talk to a lot of them again this summer as we're doing our DCI interviews that we always do. But Wes, to that point, they always say that. Like even somebody like Scott Chandler, the Blue Devils, who's like at the highest level, he will say without question, man, I do not want everybody to make all those mistakes that I made when I started. Like all the great people, they want us all not to make their mistakes. So I love that context.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, Victor Pizzola, tell us who you are and where you are in the world.
Well, I'm Victor. I'm out of Orem, Utah. I'm working with the Orem High School Marching Band. I've worked with many different programs in Utah, Washington, a little bit in Montana as well. Shout out to Havre High School, small little school close to Canada. I have been doing this for well over a decade now. I've learned so many lessons. So I'm excited to share some of them today.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And Ryan H. Turner. Ryan, have you really not been on a podcast conversation before? Because I feel like I've had so much interaction with you.
Not with you, not specifically with you, not with you. So it's an honor to be with you, Tim. Thank you for having me.
That's very nice. Tell us where you are.
Well, just like I said pre-show, that this is fortunately or unfortunately, I woke up today and realized this is my 41st year professionally involved in the marching arts as a show designer, a visual instructor, announcer, and a judge, and just an enthusiast. I bleed, sleep, and dream all about the marching arts. So it's just been part of my life, even though that I've been in a regular day job in the fire service, which I've retired from, never lost my contact in any shape or form with the marching arts over the years. And I just am very honored to be here to impart, just like these two gentlemen, some wisdom, hopefully, about what visual instruction is and even visual design, if anybody wants to ask about that. I'm a show designer as well. And as I had stated to the guys before we actually went live, I would like to approach our discussion today too, wearing partially my educator hat as well as my instructor hat, and try to marry the two. As I had said earlier, that sometimes I think in this activity, especially with some of our younger visual folks that are coming up in the world, that perhaps a lot of energy is wasted on things that don't need to be worried about at the marching band level. And I think that from a judging standpoint, I could help with that and try to decipher and take away some of the myth of judging.
Well, I think that's awesome. So listen, all of you watching, you clearly now, it's very clear, you're going to get some really good instruction. We have really smart people on this panel tonight, and we want you to be a part of this. So please put in some comments in the comment section. Tell us where you're watching from, what questions you have. If you have questions about design, about getting your visual staff to work better together, as Ryan just mentioned, what priorities should you be thinking about for marching band? Because that is different than it is for marching band or indoor, whatever. What the judges are looking for on that usually one time they see your show, it matters a lot. So the whole reason this conversation happened tonight is because I had a young visual instructor reach out to me and say, hey, I'm about to become the caption head of this program where I'm working, and I'm not sure how to do that, and I need advice. And so I connected him with some people, and then also it sort of led us to have this conversation. So I want to start there. Wes, if you're a caption head of a visual team, what does that mean? What is your responsibility, and what advice might you start with?
I think the responsibilities are largely determined by the person that signs your checks. I know that sounds really silly and such an odd way to directly approach that, but the reality of this is that the visual caption head is largely facilitating the goals of a program and a program administrator, primarily the band director, or typically the band director. Once you kind of have a pretty good idea of what that looks like within the landscape of that program, it oftentimes is going to consist of making sure that you have unilateral verbiage, kind of assembling a little bit of a path and lesson plan for how you're going to approach every component of your season, actively working through rehearsal schedules, sometimes advocating for time for yourself, and really just trying to make sure that everybody is on the same page. The other thing is that kind of what Ryan H. was talking about is we have to be super, super careful about how we approach these things. And as a young educator and an old designer, talking to the young educator that I would tell them to just stop, ask about the responsibilities from the band director, and then instantly go check the assessment and the competitive criteria for the ensemble that you're working with. Because so often we fail to reverse engineer basically all of the systems within our program to help everything in the ensemble, both the music effect, all of those things. Almost every single circuit in the country is primarily driven by the music effect caption and the effect caption. And so as I've gotten older, I've started teaching more from what the box is experiencing and less from what the individual judge is experiencing. Not that I'm necessarily ignoring them, but I'm trying to aid the overall excellence of the ensemble. And that is primarily through what happens in the box. The music effect judges, they can be your best friend for the Viz guys because they get a little bit of say in that in a lot of circuits now. But they can also be your biggest enemy and your biggest critic. And so the second we start to actually focus our efforts into the people that can reward the ensemble competitively while fulfilling the expectations and responsibilities of the band director, that's when we can really understand what that visual caption head role is like.
Okay, Ryan, you did a lot of nodding, so I'm going to let you jump on in, because really the idea of where you decide to spend your time and how the judges are going to adjudicate you and stuff, I think a lot of people just don't pay any attention to this.
That's a great point. Wes is just spot on with everything that he says. The only thing that I can add to that is, and I was just writing this down, the region that I hail from, which is basically Southern California, although I now live in Arizona, there are 3 different circuits that cover that area. So there's 3 different score sheets, 3 different ideas, and most bands pick where they're going to go. But what's critically important to me as an instructor to impart on to others is to make sure that you look at what that criteria actually is in whatever circuit you're going to design your show for or teach for. That's critically important. I think it is. While Wes does state the obvious truth, which is effect drives a lot of stuff, I will counter that with saying to make sure, and he was right, not to ignore the individual side of it, but really at the basis of everything is overall excellence. And I'm never going to shy away from that. I'm kind of old school. I need to see a marching band that gets on the field that looks like they've been trained. And if they look like they've been trained and they're doing everything uniformly, I could care less if they're doing cartwheels or whatever on the field to enhance the effect. I want to make sure that the basics are taken care of. That's where I come from. And for the circuit that I represent, the California State Band Championships, which I have most of my impact with, we're big into making sure that on the visual performance side of the sheet, that excellence is really, and uniformity and cohesiveness, that's all very much credited. One more thing I just want to add on to it. Wes does state properly that effect does drive a lot of it. Make sure you look for whatever circuit you're working with or we're going to be competing in. How much does it? Is it a 70% weight? Is it 60%? Or is it 50-50? So to make sure that you're allocating your resources and your energy effectively.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like for sure, I'm always telling people, listen, that music effect and music judge, like, does the band sound good? I mean, really, this is true for concert festival too. I mean, I say this all the time. Does the band sound good? Is there a good quality sound? Are they in tune? Does it sound good? I feel like the same thing's here. Can you tell they've been trained? Are they moving in the same way? Like, this is critically important. So I think you can get in the weeds sometimes when you don't need to be in the weeds. You just need to be stepping back and looking at the field. Victor, do you want to speak to this?
Absolutely. Look, as a visual caption head, it's really a balancing act, right? Because you're taking what the director wants, their vision for the whole program, and you're taking what the sheets say in your circuit, and you're trying to juggle and make sure everything matches. And I think in order to be a successful caption head, you really have to be very organized. And you need to plan things out, have lesson plans, understand that sometimes lesson plans don't always go their way, right? You're not going to have a perfect day where everything goes to the lesson plan. You have to be able to adapt. If one day you're working on, let's just say technique-wise, slides, and your plan was to do slides for a little bit, and then we're going to work on some choreography for the show. But then the slides are not looking the best, and you're like, okay, so I'm going to have to take some of that choreography time and work on slides a little bit. You got to do that, but you need to take notes. You need to understand where your program is, where the director wants it to go, and you have to lead it down that path as best as you can.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know what? It's if we're all honest, we've all been at rehearsals where like they just sort of, the staff shows up and like, okay, what are we going to do tonight? Okay, well, we're going to work. Okay. And then like they just, like they don't spend like, and when you talk to these guys at the very top, the great programs, they're having a meeting and they're figuring out what's the priority for this week and what are we probably going to do next week. And like it's mapped out in plans. So Victor, you talked about having a lesson plan, and then your job as the caption head is to make sure everybody knows what it is. Here's what it is, has, get their input before all that stuff. Yeah, it's good. I like it. So Vic and Wes, in passing, you mentioned about terminology, but Emily, who's watching, has asked us, how do you personally go about facilitating uniform terminology and approach among staff members? I feel like this is something that really hangs a lot of programs up.
Oh, man. That's an entire can of worms because we all come from such different backgrounds and have such distinct and different perspectives. Oftentimes, that stuff needs to be facilitated on the front end of your process. Too often, we're trying to create those understandings on the fly in the moment. Like we'll be like, well, I call it parallel. Well, I call it sixth position. Well, those are the same things, but we're trying to make sure we send a clear message to the students. One of the best ways that I've found to facilitate that is to actually have Viz blocks with just the Viz staff or just the education staff and treat them like performers, treat them like students, let them ask questions, basically go through your process, especially in the early parts of the foundational parts of your process, and let that be the opportunity for us to all learn that we're speaking the same language. It's also another opportunity to bring somebody, if you have a dance person in your program or you primarily derive how you teach visual through dance, it's your opportunity to make sure that all of our dance vocabulary is the same and that blurred line that we've slowly started to build between dance and marching is really clear and concise for our performers and for our students so that when they are communicated with, they understand. But I really sincerely believe that sitting down and having those conversations early and without the performers present and just doing it in like an actual teaching block format is a great way to do that. I'm really lucky at Bentonville as my career has transitioned. We have a Viz guy now. His name is Shay Pierce, and he is absolutely excellent. But when he was a younger visual educator, we would spend hours on the why, and we took an inventory of our program by asking why about every single thing we did, and the outcomes, both positive and negative, for every decision and every piece of terminology we used or every technique we used. And we discovered that a lot of times the why was because that's what we did or that's what we were taught, and it wasn't necessarily something that was facilitating the excellence for the ensemble. And those why conversations happened within those block settings where we basically taught each other what we knew and tried to speak the same vocabulary.
Well, that seems like a really profound point to me. Well, first off, everybody, we've made the point that you don't do this when the kids show up, right? You have to have this, you know, and like you said, if you can do it together in a block situation, great. If it's even just Zoom calls before the season, whatever, get your staff on the same page. Make sure you have that education. Wes, give me an example of, I mean, you kind of did, but give me an example of like a why that people might miss, or a why that you guys had an epiphany about.
So Shay and I come from very distinctly different backgrounds. I'm old and Shay is not. And I marched regiment back in the day, and Shay is a primarily a Crown kid who's got a lot of that experience. And I was approaching it with like, this is going to sound super technical and minutia based, and we haven't kind of got there yet, but I was teaching from a half count initiation. And a lot of people still teach from a half count initiation, but we started getting into the whys, and there are pros and there are cons, but at the end of the day, our performers were breathing in one count, and a lot of ensembles were successful with a one count initiation. So we said, hey, why are we using this half count initiation? Why are we not taking something from a different technique and applying it to this process so that our performers are having to do less responsibilities with equal or greater outcomes? But that's true of every facet of what we end up doing when we try to become successful, and we're willing to abandon, hey, I've done this for 25 years because somebody told me to do that 25 years ago. That is so hard, especially as I get older. I don't want to break myself in my old habits. We like fight it a little bit, but that's the best way to examine those things, is to just talk it out. Why are we doing this? What's the end game that we're trying to accomplish here? And is it easier or harder for the performer?
Yeah, Victor. So how have you implemented these meetings before the season to get everybody on the same page with terminology and approach?
Go take everyone out to lunch. It's that easy.
Food.
Early on in the year, even before the first rehearsal, just get together as a staff. You could go out for lunch. You just do it in the band room and hang out for a while after school. But everyone should get together, at least the band director and all of the heads at the very least. But everyone should get together and have these conversations. I think as a visual instructor, your best friend should probably be the guard director, because let's be honest, there's a lot of crossover between that. When you teach visuals, when you teach dance, when I teach a plie, I'm not the only one doing that in the marching band, right? The guard's doing that too. So sit down, have these conversations, and it's just gonna build on top of each other. If I say, hey, I'm going to teach plies this way, the guard director might be like, oh, that's cool, but this way might be a little bit better. Oh, that's great. You could learn from each other early on and be ready to put these into plans and put those plans into motion. That's how you do it.
I love it. Anybody that's watching that has a question, please put them in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from and let us know. So this is really critically important to me, because I learned that lesson way back, that like what we do needs to match what the guard does, right? And so like an example from my most basic ideas is sort of like, okay, if we're going to have a certain kind of show, and so what's the free arm going to be for the guard, and how can I interpret that into the movement, and can the style of the movement, or the we always have certain visuals for every show for the style of the show. Well, those need to come from the guard staff too, so that everybody's on the same page. It's a pretty basic idea, but I feel like if I'm the caption head, I have to initiate that and make sure that the guard person and the guard staff is on the same page. Ryan, you were nodding about that. You want to speak to that?
Well, so one of my observations over the years of seeing the variety of marching bands and the haves and the have-nots, if you will, especially when we're dealing with staff members and the number of staff members and the cultures within these bands, you'd be surprised that sometimes that separation between the guard and the band is very real and is never bridged because that's the way it's been. And so you do see that out on the field. You see two competing ensembles rather than a cohesive group. So going back to the basics of what Emily actually asked about how do you facilitate that, and I certainly agree with all the answers. Another thing, Emily, that you may want to think about is to write out a glossary of terms, if you will. About 15, maybe 18 years ago, I was writing for a senior corps, and they asked me to come up with a document about how to read drill charts. And I never even thought about putting that to paper. But once I put it to paper and then I formatted it out, it was actually a huge boost to this group to be able to learn how to actually read a drill chart and what does that quote terminology mean. And so when you asked that question earlier, I was thinking, oh, that would be something for you to think about, Emily, is to come up with a glossary of terms and make sure that at least you, if you're in charge, this is what you're going to teach. And then go out from there and make sure that that folks are in line with you as best as you can.
And actually, I have been in experiences where the band started at measure 42, but for the guard, that was the beginning of the windmills in the back corner. Let's all have the same terminology, even for just the starting points of the chunks of the show. That seems so basic, but I feel like I've seen it where they're not, and the drums just like, oh, that's where the paradiddle thing, da 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 da. No, let's all have the same names.
I worked for a band and the director was fantastic about doing this, that he divided the show that I wrote into about 6 or 7 different chunks. And he named each chunk something that either the design, the show design that I came up with reminded him of, or the music was saying something. But everybody on the field, from guard to percussion to winds, everybody knew we're going to start at the fish section. Okay, we know what that means. And so those were those anchor points that it made sense. And even for the quote, the guard, sometimes they may be a little bit off, but they weren't. And that made rehearsals go so much easier because the kids knew where to go. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, Wes, you're nodding a lot. Do you want to speak to this?
I love rehearsal section nicknames so much. But I think it's also important because it facilitates the relationship that the front ensemble has to the ensemble. And oftentimes we're asking people to understand through communication things that they're not familiar with, and also things that don't necessarily make sense within the landscape of how they learn and what their process is. So I actually have a couple band directors where the measure number is the drill page number, and they speak about chunks that way, so that musically they know exactly where they are. Drill page wise, they know exactly where they are, which communicates with the color guard exactly where they are, which communicates exactly where the front ensemble person is. And it's not exactly, that's a lot of work and a lot of spreadsheet action. Wouldn't necessarily volunteer anybody for that. But I love that shortcut of how can we not waste rehearsal time. And that is the thing with a Viz person in a marching band program, is you have a finite amount of hours. And in some places it's very little. And in some places, it's still not very much. So how do we take these things that we know from indoor and marching band and distill them down into really efficient, easily consumed, easily executed, and excellent activities, basically? And that is going to be the thing that consumes the vast majority of your time as a marching band visual caption head. How can I get as much as I can with as little input as possible, wasting as little time as possible?
Yeah, and all you have to do is I'm often guest clinician these days, and I show up, and I have the great advantage of noticing all the things that the staff that's inherent in the program doesn't really realize, but you can waste ridiculous amounts of time with everybody not knowing what the name of the chunk is and where to
Yes.
start. Like it's especially like, now wait a minute, the front ensemble, that's no, man, we do not have time. Okay. A minute ago, Wes made a comment in passing and Ryan really, really nodded. So I'm going to go back to that, and I want Ryan to be able to speak to this. As Wes mentioned in passing about advocating for your time in the rehearsal, I think we need to talk about this a little bit because you have to fight for your time, right, Ryan? I'll let you go.
Well, and actually, this is part of a broader thing. It's actually what you said earlier, Tim. And really, there's a huge spectrum in the marching band activity. You're going to have the super bands that are like what Wes is used to, where they have a vast amount of staff members and a huge amount of structure, all the way down to the band director does it all him or herself. And we have to take that into account. So that being said, when I hear about fighting for the time and how do we set up rehearsals, this is all stuff that we have to set up before you step on the field. And those priorities are going to change on a weekly basis, or even sometimes on a daily basis. So if you go to a show on a Saturday night and you run the show and you come up with a score and the judges are all hammering on this particular part of the show, I'm kind of guessing that probably part of that next week's rehearsal is going to be focusing on that. My point is that visually speaking, I see so many bands that come out on the field that tell me they haven't had time to work on the visual part. So my advice is, if you're a visual caption head or if you're a band director watching this, make time to focus on only the visual part of your show. Don't worry about music. Bop it or sing your parts or whatever. It is not a music rehearsal. There are no music comments, but make the time. Whatever that time frame is up to your organization, but you have to make the time. Conversely, if a band director is going to have a wind section and a percussion section and a color guard warm up, technique-wise and slip slurs and 8 on a hand and whatever else, well, then you should have a visual warm-up block that you can easily do within 15 to 20 minutes at a show, so that the kids start thinking, I'm not only warming up my chops, but I'm also warming up my feet and my body.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, somebody watching, Jonathan, talked about building a broader visual bridge for everybody. And he made the comment, incorporating stretches and across the floors with all movement contributors is best. Victor, when he talked about having that block and doing the visual as a unit, you nodded. So I thought maybe you wanted to contribute to that, because that's really critical. And come on, band directors, it can't be this like, hey man, I got to get the drill on, so we're going to skip the basics today.
Yeah, no.
We started this whole conversation at the very beginning talking about how you can tell if they're all well trained, and that's what we want to see ultimately. So anyway, Victor, I'm talking a lot. Go ahead.
Well, it helps the students get into the right mindset, right? And just like warm-ups do, right? Hey, if we're doing long tones, okay, we're going to focus on a nice, beautiful tone. We're doing articulation exercise. We're going to focus on our articulations. In visual basics, it's the same, right? We're focusing on nice, beautiful technique, moving well, having good posture, all of that good stuff, everything that you teach in basics to help their bodies acclimate to marching, especially during the school year when they've spent all day in the classroom and now they're forced to go from just sitting there at a desk for 40 minutes to getting up and moving. It's going to be a little bit harder, right? So having that nice visual basic at the beginning, it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be half of rehearsal. It can be a short little thing, hitting the basics and getting the most important things going. And then we can get into the rest of rehearsal. But that helps form a firm foundation that can enable the students to have more success through rehearsrsal.
Yep.
Yeah, great point. Now I'm totally gonna get off track here, but man, I remember back to when I marched Phantom Regiment eons ago. Man, like visual block basics warm up was my favorite thing. Like I'm thinking back on that, but like I just loved it, man, and I wanted to be in the front of, like, you know what I mean? Wes, what you marched regiment what year or years?
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Really?
I did.
That's some good years.
Yeah,
Okay.
there was some beat downs and some weight lost. Let's just put it that way. It was a different era.
Okay. Well, I marched a little bit earlier than that, but anyway, I was in the first Spartacus. Everybody. Okay. If you have questions and you're watching, I know if you have questions you're watching, type them in comments. Type them in. Okay. So what else do we have? I have a good question here for somebody that's watching. We talked about being aware of your sheets, making sure that you are. Well, how are you going to be adjudicated where you are? Somebody here asked a good question from Band Alumni 14. Do you think it's important to explain to your students the technicalities of the scores they receive at competitions, i.e. visual performance, music effect, etc.? How into the weeds do you get with your students?
Oh, Wes, you go.
I think that goes back to the understanding the nature of the program you're working with and being a reflection of the stated goals and policies of a band director. So I will walk into band rooms where competition is the exact last thing they want to talk about. And then I will walk into band rooms where the band director is explaining the second part of what box 4 looks like in the biz individual sheet. And I think it's more about being a true reflection of the philosophies and stated goals of a program than it is for me to decide in the moment how I feel about that and whether or not that would be something I would want to talk about. I do think it's important, though, that there be some sort of line of dialogue from the adjudicator to the performer. I've never personally been a big advocate of listening to the tapes, mostly because I do judge and I'm a foot and mouth kind of judge. So I don't want people to have to listen to me put my foot in my mouth for 7 minutes. But I do think sometimes it's important to say, hey, we're working on this because we got feedback that this part didn't work in the way that we wanted it to. I think that's something that we're using assessment to provide the way to navigate what the next steps in our program are. But that's on a personal level about where I stop with that. But no, plenty of band programs I think are very much in the technicality of the sheets.
Ryan, I know you want to speak to this. You said something about this earlier, but what would you recommend? The advice of seeing what the philosophy and the culture of the program is good. What else would you have?
This is something near and dear to my heart because as much as competitive of a person as I am, and as long as I've been adjudicating across the country, I still think at the end of the day, it's all about the performance. It's all about the kids coming off the field and doing what I teach in my motivation sessions called the mirror test. So you look at the person in the mirror, the only person staring back at you is you. And you ask that person in the mirror, did you do the very best job that you possibly could have done? And if you did, I don't really give a hoot about the scores. It's kind of irrelevant to me. I want the kids to feel that experience of performance and the satisfaction of getting that feedback from the audience like I used to when I was in drum corps way back in the day, so that's my motivation to teach and to get kids involved. However, to answer Band Alumni 14's question, the technicalities, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but I think it's okay for the band director to say, this is what we're being judged on, and this is the basis of their judging. I want to make sure that my message about judging gets out to people as best as possible. We get so hung up on the educational model, which is you take a test, you get questions wrong, you get a check mark. And that's the old style of judging back in the day, right, Tim? The old tick mark, right? That is not what we do nowadays. We give credit. So instead of teaching kids how not to make mistakes, you teach them how to do things as best as they possibly can to get the credit from me. I'm the guy that wants to give scores. I'm the guy that wants to give the points. So how do we maximize that mindset? And so if I'm going to get sheets and comments back after a show, I, as the director, want to analyze that, and I want to make that choice as to whether or not I want to share those comments with the kids. I think there's a lot of great good that will come out from sharing commentary from the judges, so the kids can hear from that other source the exact same information you're giving them as a band director, and they're not listening to you. But suddenly it becomes, oh, we just heard it from this judge. Oh, now we'll work on it. It happens all the time. It's happened all the time.
Exactly. So, Victor, how do you approach that where you are?
Well, I honestly think, first of all, the biggest competition is with yourself. That's what I preach to my students. You know, every run is a competition between you and the last run. Um, but with that being said, I think the students deserve to have a little bit of knowledge of why they're being judged the way they are, right? A brief summary of, hey, this is why the judge said this, or this is why the judge scored us like this. Give them a brief explanation. And I don't think you really need to go into that much detail when doing that. I also think the students who are very gung-ho and excited about maybe eventually teaching music or becoming instructors themselves will approach you, and then you can go into a little bit more detail. I've already had that over this summer. I've had a few students approach me and said, hey, when I graduate high school, I want to teach marching band. I want to be a staff member too. And so I kind of tell them, okay, this is why we do what we do in a little bit more detail so that they can understand, oh, this is why you're doing what you're doing, or telling us to do this instead of that. So giving that brief explanation. And if they ask, you can feed them a little bit more.
Yeah. Excellent. That's a great answer. Hey, everybody, we're talking about being a visual caption head or just visual instructor, how to prioritize all that, how that works. If you have any questions, please type those in or comments. We have a really good question here from Noah from Indiana, and I love this. I'd like advice on how to help students to transfer visual fundamentals work into the show. Man, does everybody need advice on this. He says some students will look great in fundamentals but approach drill completely differently. Why is it so hard to get them to apply? Who wants to speak to that?
I'll go first because this is something that just harkens back to what I said before. For Noah, if you can, with whatever group or groups you're working for, make sure that you have that focus time on just the visual portion of the show. And it's a little old school, but it works for me. Don't let them go on. If you're rehearsing a chunk and you're seeing something that's not transferring over from the basics, then point it out. And also don't forget to incorporate the show them how to do it rather than tell them how to do it. That helps a lot with kids nowadays. I think one of the things that kids want to do is they want to rise to your level of expectation, but you got to back it up. You can't just talk about it. So one of the things is to halt rehearsal, go back, start it again, and let's do that right. And it gets a little old, and like I said, it's a little old school, but for me, it works.
And maybe not just get it right one time, but maybe get it right multiple times. Right. Then it wasn't just a fluke.
Right. Very good. Very good. Yes.
Wes, you were nodding. I'm going to let you talk about this too.
I mean, something we see great band directors do with music is they compartmentalize the skills necessary to accomplish a task, and they create exercises or etudes that specifically do that thing. So often what we do as visual educators is we go, well, I'm going to do this, 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 I'm going to do this. And then you don't take the time to go, well, we can't do this skill in the show. That's because they're not being supplied the information with the exercises that we have provided them. So we need to take time outside of the rehearsal space, and we need to create an exercise that specifically attacks and addresses the issue that's happening out of context. So let's say, most bands programs these days are pretty much just direction of travel. So like we're going from dot to dot, from point A to point B, but we have an extended follow the leader section in our show. If that's something that we can't achieve and we don't have an exercise to achieve it, working on it in the context of the show is probably not going to be a very fruitful experience for us. We've got to find a way to create a circumstance in our visual only rehearsal that can replicate the parts of that we're trying to get better at, so we can just install it in the show. Exactly like a good band director does with like double tonguing or scalar work or a breathing exercise, something like that. We've got to make sure that all of our exercises fit in a box that addresses the needs that the show has created for the performer.
Yep.
And I'm loving that. And then would you suggest that if you're you can even pull the block at any point during the rehearsal, by the way, if you're working on that, then wouldn't it be lovely to now go apply it directly to that show rather than 20 minutes later? Remember when we worked on this?
Yep.
That's a little bit of planning too. Wes, you're laughing. Am I being ridiculous?
No, I love that, but because so often really, really, really talented type A people are often visual educators. And that's why I've always struggled to be a good visual educator, is because I'm in a messy office and my brain is going in a million different directions. I'll forget this conversations when we're off the phone. But the best visual people I'm around are so type A and so like everything has its place that sometimes they don't abandon something quick enough to move in the direction that's necessary for it to be more fruitful for them. And that is one of those moments like, hey, we're in the context of this. It's not working in the way we want it to in the show. It's okay to go, let's reassess. Let's come up with a game plan next rehearsal. Let's have a water break and meet and talk about this. Let's re-strategize in the moment. It's okay sometimes to let go of a strategy that's not bearing fruit because we don't have enough rehearsal time to waste on it.
Yeah, it's good. Victor, you sort of mentioned that earlier about sometimes you have to abandon your plan when you have to address something that's happened. So being a little bit nimble, and I guess it's the head visual caption head who's the one that's got to make that happen, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. Okay. Ryan, you want to speak?
I just wanted to say, Tim, that's out of the box thinking about taking a block exercise that Wes has come up with to address a problem and then going directly to that drill movement and then putting it to the test. Wes is correct. I'm a type A guy and I got a schedule. I got to stick to the schedule and I got to get that right. Blah, 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 blah. That's way out of the box. And I love it. I think that's very creative. And I think that if anything that we can help give out to the community today is some ideas about what to do. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, but see, the reason I made that comment is because, Wes, to your point of like band directors, I think, need examples of how this applies to how they teach music. I loved that you mentioned that, right? And to me, this is the way this would work. Like if you're standing on the field and the double tonguing part is a mess, what do? Brass players, pull it in. Mm-hmm. Let's take 5 minutes. Let's fix this. Let's do this slow. Let's get the da. Now go back and let's do it okay. So why don't we do that with the visual, right? So, okay, this visual thing we're trying to do is a mess. Let's form up our block real quick. Let's figure it out. Let's do it. We can see it cleaner. Okay, now go back. Like, it's just good rehearsal stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But I think to your point, Ryan, like people don't have that sort of feeling of doing that same sort of inherent normal thing they would do with music with the visual.
Yeah, right. It's awesome.
Anybody have anything else before I move on to the next thing? I have to say, this is like phenomenal information tonight. Like, I am so excited about everything you guys are saying and the advice we're giving. And thank you, everybody who's watching and sending in questions. We have a really good question here. I love this from Emily. Again, how do you balance the demand of a rehearsal with the growing concern of injury prevention in the activity? I think we need to maybe talk about this because the visual caption head may be the one that has to really be spidey sensing into this. How do you make sure the kids are safe and still try to accomplish what you're trying to do?
Rule number one, don't teach it or don't let them do, or let me try to get my words out. Don't give them anything to do that you haven't trained them to do. And that goes right back to what Wes talked about. Absolutely, injuries are going to occur if you're giving this high demand stuff to kids that it doesn't belong if you have not created the proper training bed for them to operate from. The injury prevention in the activity is also probably helped by creating or coming up with some kind of a stretching program. Although I personally believe that some stretching programs out there go on way too long. Static stretching has been proven to not be beneficial before a physical activity as much as you think it is. So perhaps a 5 to 7 minute stretching program versus a 15 to 20 minute stretching program is something to consider, and they consider a post-exercise, post-rehearsal stretching is actually more beneficial. That being said, it all adds to the injury prevention that Emily's bringing up.
Yeah, and to this point of the job of the visual caption head is to figure out this plan, right? So if you're going to have them try to do something visual, especially if it's new to your program and what your kids are typically been doing, you have to plan for that, teach for that. Victor, do you have an example of something that you've done with one of your groups where you had to plan, get them ready, get them physically able, work toward that? I'm throwing this on you at the last minute, but like, do you have an example?
Yeah. Last year, the group I was helping out with, we had some visuals that made we would just kind of look like robots. there's not a lot of flexibility in there, and we kind of needed that. And I had to take a step back and be like, okay, so maybe it is something I, as the caption head, maybe wasn't doing well enough at that time, helping work on flexibility. So we worked on that. We worked on our body's flexibility, some strength training a little bit, and then we were able to do things in the show that were pretty good, and we stopped looking like robots after a while, and it just looked better. It looked like they're doing things very well, and they did very well, you know.
Yeah, and to your point, sometimes it's that I don't know how to demonstrate it right, you know? Like maybe I'm not so maybe I do need to bring in that guard instructor that knows how to move a little better and let them demonstrate. Because, you know, no offense, band directors, but your kids always move and look just like you do. And so, and I guess that would be the same for our visual staff. Wes, do you have an example that you want to use for this, what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and it's more of a philosophy change that I have seen happen. Because I was born and bred a tuba player, the worst tuba player you've ever heard. I was very much in that Arnold Jacobs wind and song approach. It's like he had this phrase. He's like, the baseball pitcher doesn't think about throwing the ball when he throws the ball. So like he believed that the creation of music should be through basically the end product and the statements of the things that created the end product. I've transitioned over time, especially in the visual realm, to talk about sensated learning and activation. So as a young visual educator, I talked about angles of body parts and I talked about joints. But the reality is that those don't tell the performer what that experience is supposed to feel like for them. So it often puts them in a biomechanically disadvantageous situations for their body because they don't know what it's supposed to feel like to achieve it at the highest level. So now instead of talking about angles and joints and stuff like that, I talk about what you should feel, how you should feel it, and where you should feel it so that the performer can consciously understand the feeling that creates a safe place for their body to be as a performer. And that change in how I've approached speaking into it has been monumental in helping prevent injury. Because the performer is thinking about muscles and what muscles are being used in what ways, as compared to, I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep my legs straight. That's a bad way to approach this. Let's work from our quads. Let's work from our core. Let's work from our butts. Whatever. Yeah.
I'm in a position, Tim, right now working with a school out in Arizona, Hamilton High School, and I'm not even the visual caption head. I'm just a tech, and that's a perfect position for me to be in, to be able to absorb stuff. And the visual caption head and show designer is Casey Early, who is fantastic. And he talks about exactly what Wes was just talking about. And I've learned a vast amount this past summer, just working with Casey, being quiet, zipping my lip, which is hard for me to do, as most people know, and to be able to just absorb what he is giving out in terms of what's activating, what is necessary to be activated, and it makes perfect sense. And I, at first, as an old curmudgeon, I was thinking, oh, this is too much information. It's not. Kids are smart. They'll pick it up. The kids that don't pick it up, they'll pick it up later because they're not, you see those people and then you can go work out with them one-on-one. But generally speaking, Wes is spot on because it works. I've seen it firsthand.
This seems really important. So I want to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. So who can give an example of the way you would speak it?
So I used to teach a tendu much like a dancer taught a tendu. And I talked about pointing the foot and creating point to the lower body and the projection of energy through the lower body and stuff like that. But what I kept getting this arm that I'm using my arm as an example, this leg that lifted slightly off the ground and then protruded out to create the tendu. So I got a very prominent leg bend as I taught the tendu. What I realized when I started watching really talented dancers execute a tendu is they were doing something that they probably weren't aware that they were doing, and they were activating their quadriceps, so the front of their thigh. So simply by having a performer palpitate themselves, so set their hand on their quadricep and say, make sure that your quad is activated when you do the tendu, instantly I got straight legs from the tendu. I didn't talk about a joint. I didn't talk about a straight leg, anything like that. I talked about a sensation and then activation of a muscle to create that articulate limb.
Love it. That's a great example, Wes. You just earned your keep for being here tonight just for that. I'm just kidding. All right.
Good
I'm
job,
loving
Wes.
it. So is there a topic or something that some of you guys came in with that we haven't gotten to about being a visual caption head, or anything that you guys wanted to make sure and mention? Because we're getting down to like the last 10 minutes. Want to make sure. Anybody have anything they came with? There's time.
Go, Ryan.
No, go ahead, Wes. I caught you mid yawn.
I think the thing that I struggle with the most when I am around a new program is that oftentimes a visual performer is not aware of their excellence or lack of excellence. Oftentimes we have very few staff members for lots of performers, and we're giving really big, broad general instructions, and we're catering the experience to a group of people, not an individual person. But as a musician, almost every single musician in every band program in the country knows, like, I am this part of my section. I am first chair. I am third chair. I am last chair. I'm a third clarinet player. I'm a first mellophone player. They know exactly where they sit as musicians because they have been assessed. Oftentimes I'll go into a band program and I'll say, all right, everybody, put your heads down and close your eyes. All right, if you think you're a great visual performer, raise your hand. All right, put them down. If you think you're a bad visual performer, raise your hand. All right, put them down. And those do not reflect in the slightest the actual experience that's going on there, because we haven't created experiences that actually tell performers whether or not they're good at skills or bad at skills. So one of the best ways that I've seen to address that is to create graded blocks, either in an across the floors block or in just if we're just doing a regular old band block. I typically will always be reordering the block based upon skills, with the best performers in the front and the worst performers in the back at those skills. And I'm constantly moving people around so that the performer's goal is to be in the front row. And we preface it with, hey, being good or bad at a skill is not anything other than a reality of what's happening here. The judge is assessing us no matter what. I want you to know whether or not you're good or bad at a skill. Then when we move those skills into an across the floor block, because the best performers are in the front row, they're waiting for the rest of the across the floor block to get to them. So you have built-in leaders that can find performers that have deficiencies that they used to have. They can tap them on the shoulder and they go, hey, I really struggled with count 8-2. Let me tell you how I got better at that. And then you create this constant race and contest to move forward in the block, and you introduce actual assessment to performers, because so often our marching arts activity visually, we have no clue where we are. We have no clue if we're good. We have no clue if we're bad. Find a way to assess performers. That would be my most important thing to lead this conversation with.
And doing it in a way that's not demeaning to anybody.
Not punitive at all. Never, ever, ever. Yeah.
Right. So it's all sort of aspirational, and how can I help you? And let me also, I thought you were going to say, take time to pull them aside, get special time with them, because I feel like people don't do enough of that either.
But I feel like that's also sometimes a byproduct of the realities of education and marching arts education. Is, there are programs that have 19 people on Viz staff, but the overwhelming majority of people that will consume this podcast are on an island. They are either by themselves or it's them and a handful of people. And by that sheer nature of that process, the individual assessment goes away. And so I try to create leaders and peers in the program that can help the Viz Caption Head supply that information in a positive way.
Yeah, that's great. And I know many people get huge mileage out of their, like, say, section leaders, student leaders being the ones that do that as well, because a well-trained student leader can take their section and help individualize the instruction and support for those less achieving kids. Yeah, Victor, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything Wes said. And, we need to make the environment as supportive and friendly and fun as possible for those students. I'm not going to lie, when I was a little 19-year-old marching tech, just out of drum corps, super excited to do things, I did get a little like, you got to go, you got to do this, you got to do that, but the reality is they're just kids, and this is just a fun activity. I want them to be great. They want to be great, so just go and have fun doing it. Being a caption head is a very stressful job. It can be very stressful, but also can be very rewarding to see that product that the kids do. You get down there at the end of the season, the final show, and I don't even listen to the judges' tapes at that final competition. I just sit back and enjoy the show. This is our final product. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to enjoy what the kids did. Let the kids enjoy it. Go up there at the end and celebrate with them. Say, you did a great job. And that's what we have to do. We have to be there to pump them up, especially when they're feeling down in the middle of the season, when they might not be thinking they're doing as well as they think they should be doing. We have to be there to support them every step of the way. And our fellow staff members too. We're humans too. We're adults, right? If I'm walking around and I see the front ensemble tech, looking down and beat up, I will try to go and cheer them up. Say, hey, no, you're doing a fantastic job with the front ensemble. You're doing great. We're doing wonderful things. And if there's anything I can do, I will help. If there's anything the band director can do, we could go and approach them and they could try to help. We're a team at the end of the day. And that's what you have to remember. We're a team. We're supposed to be there to support each other and help each other all the way through to the end of the season, and then start planning for the next season.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love those points. We've got a couple good questions here right at the end. AV asks, I really love this topic and point Wes brought up about individual visual performance awareness. How do you become great at teaching both individual and ensemble visual, since they can be so different? So teaching individual visual versus ensemble visual. Anybody have anything they want to mention about that, the intricacies of those? It's kind of a big topic, but anybody want to mention anything?
Yeah, I think we'd have to go into that second hour. I think it goes to the foundational aspect of what we're doing is that at the individual level is setting up the success for the ensemble. The person AV is correct. It is two different ways of teaching. But I believe the individual comes first to be able to get that excellence you're looking for out of the ensemble.
Yeah, good point. And then the other question was good was, how do you motivate visual excellence in a program? Victor, you sort of spoke to that, but any of you, how do you motivate visual excellence? That's sort of how do you build that culture where they're all excited about it and they want it to happen?
Did you guys know that Ryan has a wonderful leadership program? And he can help you build that culture. He's done it in a couple of my programs. It's fantastic. You may want to look into that.
Ryan, what's your shirt say, buddy?
Dynamics of leadership. Thank you, Wes. That's very kind of you. Totally making me blush. Knock it off.
I personally think it's about creating a circumstance and a situation where performers can fail, and it not be the end of the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, like the best. We started this entire segment with this. Like the best learning situations for us are situations of failure. Primarily as a visual caption head or an educator or a designer, we aren't trying to prevent failure. We're just trying to have failure happen in a safe place where we can all grow and learn from it. And if that failure is happening in your process, in your space, not in the show, that's your primary goal. Your goal is not that there isn't any failure. The goal is that it happens in a place where everybody can learn to accept it and learn to interact with it, because it creates positivity in how we learn how to fail.
Yeah, that's excellent. Ryan, do you want to speak to that?
Well, Wes is spot on, obviously. Victor said something so just spot on as well. It's just, let's have fun with this. And I hear what Wes is saying about it's okay to fail. And I think about what Victor is saying about let's just have fun. At the end of the day, I come from the Velvet Knights. We were all about the crowd. This is what we wanted. We wanted feedback. We wanted to have a good time, right? We worked our butts off to perfect what we did. So there was a certain amount of work, but man, we gotta make that connection between the work and the payoff. What is that? What is that? And that's that thrill of performance that I try to teach and try to get out there with kids so they understand the magic of behind all of the blood, sweat, and tears that we do. You know, at the end of the day, I think one of the things that I would like to leave people with in this particular format of having a podcast is rehearsal etiquette. We haven't really talked about that. And again, the broad spectrum of the big super bands have this down all the way down to the band directors doing it themselves or a very limited staff. Have etiquette. Make sure, especially with the bands that are up and coming that may not be as advanced or accomplished, have focused chunks of rehearsal. Don't try to throw everything at the kids at one time. Have a music chunk, have a visual chunk, and then do run-throughs and make it very basic. But to have that connection between the idea of competitiveness, which is fine and dandy, but it's really at the end of the day, I think it's the joy of performing and just having people stand up and clap for you. Even if it's your own parents, I think that's really where it's at.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. I can't tell you how many times I walk into a band program just doing like a clinic, like a one-day clinic or rehearsal clinic or something, and it's like life or death, and it is so serious. And I understand, I get it, I've been there, but so many times, Ryan, I literally pull the staff along, I'm like, you know, this is supposed to be fun. Like, you know, we're putting on a show, everybody. We're putting on a show, you know. So let's make it. You have to remind people of that because it matters so much. People care so much, and I love that. You know, that reminding of that. By the way, speaking to something, we're about to wrap up, everybody, but you guys talked about being able to make mistakes at rehearsal, and Wes, you talked about, I think, creating an environment where it's okay to make a mistake. I feel like this is so important. You know, I had some wonderful conversations with Scott Chandler. I put those out as podcasts. There's also a course that you can take at marchingartseducation.com where you can hear all of those conversations that I had with him. But he very specifically says, he tells the performers, this is where you're supposed to make all the mistakes here in rehearsal. You should be making mistakes in rehearsal. That's how we figure out how to not have those mistakes and how to fix it and what's not working. You figure that all out in rehearsal. So if you create an environment in the rehearsal where everybody knows it's okay to make it, this is where you're supposed to be making your mistakes, not trying, you know, you're trying to perfect your show. But he makes that point very clearly, and I feel like that's really important. Ryan, you sort of said a great wrap up, so I'm going to let Wes and Victor each say a great wrap up. Like, Victor, what would you want to say in closing to anybody that's watching as we're finishing this?
Just remember to have fun and to be organized as much as you possibly can, because life happens, things happen in rehearsal that make you change your plans. So just being able to organize things well. And I kind of want to make a quick comment about that stretching question and making sure our bodies are healthy. You know, I focus this year in particular. I really wanted to focus on injury prevention. And I know we should always be looking at that, but this year I really wanted to make a very focused attempt at injury prevention and building flexibility and mobility. So I actually did something last year to start this. I started doing personal training and going to the gym, meet with a personal trainer who really instilled into me the importance of stretching and the differences between dynamic stretching and static stretching and how those can help you. And I try to instill that with the students. And I've been through many programs where, you know, when we tell a student to do a push-up, it's not really a push-up. It's just a little flop, you know, stuff like that. Or when they stretch, it's just like that, you know. But really, how do you stretch? So teaching proper stretching is important. And I saw from the beginning of June when we started summer marching band to now, I saw a huge bit difference in their flexibility, in their mobility. And their bodies are understanding things that I didn't really have to put into words. They just told them to do that, and their bodies are now able to do things that I wanted them to do, you know, because I instilled in them how to use their bodies in the best way. So being as detailed as possible, again, planning, having fun, all those things. It's just, like I said before, it's a stressful thing to be a caption head, but it's also rewarding. So enjoy.
Yeah. Excellent. I love that. And the dynamic stretching thing and teaching them how to increase that mobility and flexibility is awesome. And Ryan, I'm not going to say anything to you about, because I know that you are not unfamiliar with the gym. We've all seen your Facebook feed, so that's awesome. Wes, you get the final word, I guess, tonight. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I think it's sometimes important to zoom out just a little bit and think about the realities of the fact that for everyone in our activity, it really comes down to three things. It comes down to character, chemistry, and competence. And so the best way to be a good visual caption head is to make sure that you reflect the program that you're representing at the highest level, and you have professional interactions with your peers and performers. The chemistry part is playing nice in the sandbox with those peers. And the competence part is always being prepared as much as you can be. And we can't always come in as prepared as we want to be, because sometimes we have some missing links in our process, in our person. But as long as we're striving every day to come in as competently prepared as possible, and we follow those other two key C words, we are on our way to being very, very excellent in this craft.
I love that. That's an excellent way to wrap that up. And Mark, who's watching, says being good is fun, and that's true too. So you're having fun, and being good is certainly lots of fun too. It's excellence is fun. So, gosh, I was super impressed. You guys were wonderful. So Ryan and Wes and Victor, thank you so much. What great information. Thank you everybody for the good questions and for watching. If you thought this was interesting and helpful, please tell people that it's here. It's on YouTube now and all these places where it went live. Please tell them to come and find it and watch it and share it with others as well. So thanks everybody for watching. And Victor, Wes, and Ryan, wonderful job, guys. Thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.